August 21, 1969. The International Hotel, Las Vegas. Elvis Presley stands alone on stage, a single spotlight cutting through the darkness. He's supposed to be performing Love Me Tender, but instead, he does something that stops the entire room cold. He kneels. Not the rock and roll knee slide his fans expect. Not a theatrical bow. Elvis Aaron Presley, the king of rock and roll, drops to both knees in the middle of the stage and covers his face with his hands. For 30 seconds that feel like eternity, the most famous entertainer in the world sits there, shoulders shaking, while 80,000 people wonder if they're witnessing a breakdown or something else entirely. The cameras keep rolling, the audience doesn't dare breathe, and what happens next will change how the world sees Elvis Presley forever. But to understand why that moment shattered everything you think you know about the king, we have to go back exactly 10 years. To another stage, another crowd, and a promise Elvis made that night, a promise that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Because what those 80,000 fans witnessed wasn't just a gesture, it was a man keeping his word to someone who couldn't be there to see it. Someone whose absence from that Las Vegas stage tells a story about love, loss, and the crushing weight of fame that no biography has ever dared to tell. Until now. The man Elvis was honoring that night had died believing his son had forgotten him. The promise Elvis kept was one he'd made in secret, witnessed by only one person who swore never to speak of it. And the reason it took 10 years to fulfill, that's where this story gets complicated. Because keeping that promise meant risking everything Elvis had built, his career, his marriage, his relationship with his fans, even his life. What was the promise? Who was he honoring? Why did it take 10 years? We'll reveal the first piece in just a moment. But first, you need to understand how a boy from Tupelo learned that sometimes love means keeping secrets that could destroy you. January 8, 1959. Elvis's 24th birthday. Not at Graceland, not surrounded by fame and fortune, but in a small hospital room in Memphis, holding his father Vernon's hand as the older man recovers from a heart attack that nearly killed him. This is the Elvis the world never saw. No pompadour, no gold lame, just a scared young man who'd almost lost the only parent he had left, barely 2 years after his mother Gladys died in this same hospital. The heart attack had come without warning. Vernon collapsed in Graceland's kitchen while Elvis was in the studio, laying down tracks for what would become his next album. By the time Elvis reached the hospital, his father was unconscious, machines keeping him alive, while doctors delivered the news no son wants to hear. Touch and go, they said. The next 48 hours will tell us everything. Elvis hadn't left that hospital room since. For 3 days, he sat beside Vernon's bed, watching the rise and fall of his father's chest, listening to the steady beep of monitors that meant the difference between having a family and being completely alone in the world. When Vernon finally opened his eyes on that birthday morning, the first thing he saw was his son's face, unshaven and hollow with exhaustion. The first words out of his mouth weren't about pain or fear. They were about legacy. "Son," Vernon whispered, his voice rough from the breathing tube they'd removed hours earlier, "I need you to promise me something." Elvis tried to shush him, the way you do when someone you love is weak and needs rest. But Vernon gripped his hand with surprising strength. "No, listen to me. We both know my heart ain't what it used to be. The doctors are trying to be optimistic, but I see it in their eyes. This ain't going to be the last time we have this conversation." The words hit Elvis like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on getting his father through the crisis that he hadn't allowed himself to think about the future, about a world where Vernon Presley didn't exist. "Daddy, don't talk like that. You're going to be fine," the doctors said. "The doctors say a lot of things," Vernon interrupted. "But hearts don't lie, Elvis. Mine's been telling me for months that time's running short. So I need you to listen to me now, while I still have the strength to say what needs saying." Vernon's eyes, usually warm and gentle, took on an intensity Elvis had rarely seen. This wasn't the supportive father who'd encouraged his musical dreams. This was a man racing against time to pass on something crucial. I need you to promise me something, son. When I'm gone, and we both know that day is coming sooner than either of us wants, I need you to remember where you came from. Not the mansion, not the gold records. Remember the boy who used to sit on our porch in Tupelo singing hymns with his mama. Elvis felt his throat tighten. Those memories lived in a part of his heart he rarely visited anymore. The poverty had been real, but so had the music. Gospel songs that filled their tiny house on Sunday mornings. Harmonies that made their struggles feel temporary and their hope feel eternal. You remember how your mama used to say that music was God's gift to poor people, that it was the one thing nobody could take away from us, no matter how little we had. Elvis nodded, not trusting his voice. Gladys had said those exact words countless times, usually while they listened to gospel programs on their old radio, the one luxury they'd managed to keep even when everything else got repossessed. Well, that gift didn't die with her, Elvis. It lives in you. But sometimes I watch you on those movie sets, singing songs that don't mean nothing to nobody, and I wonder if you've forgotten what music is really for. The criticism strung, partly because Elvis knew it was true. How many meaningless songs had he recorded for movies that existed only to make money? How many times had he stood on stage singing words that felt hollow, performing for audiences who screamed at his image instead of listening to his heart? Promise me, Elvis, when you reach the pinnacle of your career, when you're performing for the biggest audience of your life, you'll stop everything and perform one gospel song. Not for the crowd, not for the money, for your mama, for me, for the memory of a family that knew poverty and found salvation in music. The request was specific, almost ritualistic in its detail. Vernon had clearly been thinking about this for longer than just the past 3 days in the hospital. It doesn't matter what song, Vernon continued. Pick one that meant something to us, something that reminds you who you were before the world decided who you should be. Sing it like you used to sing in our kitchen when it was just us and the music and nothing else mattered. Elvis stared at his father's face, seeing lines of exhaustion and pain that hadn't been there a week ago. The heart attack had aged Vernon years in a matter of days, but his eyes burned with the intensity of someone who'd glimpsed mortality and found clarity in the darkness. "Why is this so important to you, Daddy?" Vernon was quiet for a long moment, gathering strength for what Elvis would later realize was the most important conversation of his life. "Because I've been getting letters, son. People write to me sometimes, telling me how your music helped them through dark times. But they're not writing about the movie songs or the Vegas numbers. They're writing about moments when you let your guard down, when they could hear your heart in your voice." Vernon reached under his pillow and pulled out a worn envelope. His movements were slow, careful, but determined. "This one came last week, right before the heart attack, from a woman in Alabama whose husband died in Korea. She said the only thing that got her through the funeral was hearing you sing 'Peace in the Valley' on the radio. Said it reminded her that music could be a prayer when words weren't enough." Elvis took the letter with trembling hands. The handwriting was shaky, elderly, but the message was clear. Music had been a lifeline when everything else failed. "That's what I want you to promise me, Elvis, that when you have the biggest stage in the world, you'll use it to remind people that music can heal broken hearts. That underneath all the fame and glamour, you're still that boy who believes songs can save souls." The promise Elvis made that January morning was more than words. It was a covenant between father and son, between the boy from Tupelo and the man he'd become. A commitment to authenticity in a world that rewarded performance over truth. "I promise, Daddy," Elvis said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "When I reach the top, when I have the biggest audience of my career, I'll stop everything and sing gospel. For you, for Mama, for everyone who needs to remember that music is bigger than entertainment." Vernon smiled for the first time since waking up. The grip on Elvis's hand relaxed, and some of the urgency left his voice. "That's my boy. That's the son your mama raised." But as Vernon recovered over the following weeks and life returned to its relentless pace of recording sessions, movie deals, and screaming fans, that hospital room conversation began to feel like something that happened to someone else. The promise didn't disappear. It lived in the back of Elvis's mind like a song he couldn't quite remember the words to. Years passed. Elvis conquered television, Hollywood, and the hearts of millions. But every time he thought about fulfilling his promise, something stopped him. Colonel Parker said gospel didn't sell to mainstream audiences. The movie studios wanted him to stick to the formula that made money. Even his own band questioned whether religious music fit the Elvis brand they'd all worked so hard to build. The promise became a weight Elvis carried, growing heavier with each passing year. Each new success felt hollow because it took him further from the boy who'd made that commitment to his father. Each compromise with commercial interests felt like a betrayal of the moment when Vernon had asked him to choose authenticity over approval. But in 1968, something happened that would change everything. The '68 comeback special reminded Elvis who he'd been before the world decided who he should be. Sitting in that small studio, playing acoustic guitar and talking to the audience like they were old friends, he remembered the power of honest music. That night, alone in his hotel room after the tapping, Elvis made a phone call that would set the wheels in motion for what would happen in Las Vegas the following year. "Daddy," he said when Vernon answered, "I think I'm ready to keep that promise." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Elvis thought the call had dropped. When Vernon finally spoke, there were tears in his voice. "It's been 10 years, son. I thought you'd forgotten." "I could never forget," Elvis replied, staring out at the city lights that stretched toward the horizon. "I just needed to find the right moment, the right stage, the right audience." But what Elvis didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, is that Vernon's heart condition had worsened significantly since their last conversation. The doctors had given him months, not years, and the weight of watching his son struggle with prescription medication, failed movies, and a marriage falling apart had accelerated his decline in ways no medical chart could measure. Vernon Presley would die 3 weeks before Elvis's Las Vegas opening night, taking the promise with him to the grave. Or so everyone believed. July 15th, 1969. Vernon Presley's funeral. Elvis stands at the graveside wearing sunglasses that can't hide the devastation in his eyes. He's buried both parents now, and the weight of being the last Presley feels like it might crush him completely. The service is small, private, just family and a few close friends. But as the crowd disperses, an elderly man approaches Elvis, someone he doesn't recognize but who clearly knows him. "Mr. Presley," the man says, his voice gentle but urgent, "my name is Samuel Hayes. I was your father's attorney for the last few months of his life. He asked me to give you this after the funeral." Hayes hands Elvis a sealed envelope with his name written in Vernon's familiar handwriting. Inside is a single sheet of paper and a small brass key. The letter is brief but devastating. "Son, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you're probably thinking that promise you made me died with me. But I knew you, Elvis. I knew you'd find a reason not to keep it, some excuse about timing or business or what other people might think. So I made arrangements." That key opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown. Box 247. Inside, you'll find something that will make keeping your promise impossible to avoid. "I'm sorry for what I'm about to put you through, but some things matter more than being comfortable. Keep your word, son. The world needs to hear who you really are. All my love, Daddy." Elvis reads the letter 3 times, his hands shaking more with each pass. Vernon had planned this. Even facing death, he'd found a way to ensure his son couldn't back out of the promise that meant everything to him. 2 days later, Elvis sits in a sterile bank vault, staring at the contents of box 247. What he finds there changes everything he thought he knew about his father's final months. There are letters, dozens of them, handwritten notes from fans, but not the usual requests for autographs or declarations of love. These are different, desperate, personal, letters from people who found hope in Elvis's music during their darkest moments. A mother whose son survived Vietnam because Elvis' songs on the radio reminded him there was beauty worth fighting for. A teenager who didn't take his own life because Love Me Tender played at the exact moment he was about to give up hope. An elderly woman whose husband died in her arms, and Elvis's voice singing How Great Thou Art on the radio was the only thing that got her through the funeral. But the most devastating item in the box is a recording device, an old reel-to-reel tape recorder with a single tape marked for Elvis Play This Before Vegas. Elvis's hands shake as he threads the tape. When he presses play, Vernon's voice fills the small vault room, but he sounds different, weaker. This was recorded in his final days. Elvis, I know you think keeping that promise is about me, about honoring your old man or paying respect to your mama's memory. But it ain't about us, son, it's about them. Vernon's voice cracks, and Elvis can hear him crying. All these letters, these people who wrote to tell me how your music saved their lives. They don't know Elvis Presley, the movie star. They know Elvis Presley, the boy who sang in church, who understood that music can be a lifeline when you're drowning. The tape continues for 23 minutes. Vernon reads excerpts from the letters, his voice growing weaker but more determined with each story of redemption, hope, and survival connected to his son's music. That promise you made me wasn't really about gospel music, Elvis. It was about authenticity. It was about using that stage, that platform God gave you, to remind people that underneath all the fame and glamour, you're still that boy who believes music can heal broken hearts. The tape ends with Vernon singing, barely a whisper, but unmistakably, He Touched Me, the gospel song he used to sing Elvis to sleep with when they lived in that tiny house in Tupelo. Keep your promise, son, not for me, for them. Elvis sits in that vault for 2 hours after the tape ends, reading every letter, understanding for the first time that his father's dying wish wasn't about religion or nostalgia. It was about using his influence to remind the world that vulnerability and faith aren't weaknesses. They're the foundation of real strength. But there's one more item in the box that changes everything. A contract signed by Vernon just weeks before his death. He'd used his own money to hire the Jordanaires, Elvis's favorite gospel group, to be in Las Vegas for opening night, even though they weren't scheduled to perform. Vernon had booked them for one song. He'd paid them to wait backstage until Elvis called for them, with instructions to be ready to perform He Touched Me at a moment's notice. The old man had thought of everything, the emotional weight of the letters, the recorded plea, and now professional musicians ready to help his son fulfill the promise. Vernon had orchestrated the moment from beyond the grave. But Vernon's plan had a flaw he couldn't have predicted. 3 days before opening night, the Jordanaires' lead singer, Gordon Stoker, pulls Elvis aside during rehearsals with news that makes the promise infinitely more complicated. Elvis, we can't do this, not the way your daddy planned it. Elvis feels his world tilting. What do you mean? We got word from Colonel Parker. He says if we perform gospel music during your Vegas show, he'll make sure we never work in this town again. And it's not just us, he's threatening everyone. The band, the backup singers, even the sound engineers. Anyone who helps you keep this promise is going to pay for it. Elvis realizes that fulfilling his father's dying wish might destroy the careers of everyone he cares about. The choice Vernon thought was simple, honor your promise, has become impossible. The Colonel isn't just worried about one song. He's terrified that Elvis choosing authenticity over commercial appeal will set a precedent. If Elvis can break the carefully constructed formula for one gospel number, what's to stop him from making other choices based on personal conviction rather than market research? Standing in that rehearsal room, holding his father's contract for the Jordanaires, Elvis understands that keeping his promise isn't just about singing a song. It's about choosing between the life Vernon wanted him to live and the career Colonel Parker has built around him. But Elvis finds a solution so unexpected, so dangerous, that it will either make that Las Vegas show legendary or end his career forever. What he decides to do will depend on whether he's willing to risk everything for 30 seconds of truth. August 21st, 1969, 2 hours before showtime at the International Hotel. Elvis stands in his dressing room, holding the brass key from Vernon's safety deposit box like a talisman. Tonight is the night. The promise will either be kept or broken forever. The pressure is suffocating. Colonel Parker has made his position clear. Stick to the setlist, give the people what they want, don't risk the most lucrative deal of Elvis's career for sentimental nonsense. The Jordanaires are backstage, but they're terrified of the consequences. Even Priscilla, usually supportive, has begged him to let this go. "Elvis, your father wouldn't want you to destroy your career over this," she says, adjusting his costume for the third time. "He'd understand." But Elvis knows something Priscilla doesn't. He's listened to that tape from the safety deposit box every night for a month. He's read every letter from fans whose lives were changed by music that came from the heart. And he's realized that his career, as successful as it is, has become a prison built from other people's expectations. The solution Elvis has found is both brilliant and terrifying. He's not going to tell anyone what he's planning, not the Jordanaires, not the band, not even Priscilla. When the moment comes, he'll make the choice alone, and everyone else will have to decide in real time whether to follow him into the unknown or watch him fall. The moment of truth comes earlier than anyone expects. Elvis is 3 songs into the set, the crowd is electric, and everything is going according to plan. Then, during Love Me Tender, he sees something that stops him cold. In the front row, an elderly woman is crying, not the happy tears of a fan seeing her idol, but the broken sobs of someone experiencing profound loss. She's clutching a photograph. Elvis can see it's a young man in military uniform. Her son, he realizes, probably didn't make it home from Vietnam. That's when Elvis understands that Vernon's promise was never about him. It was about this woman and the thousands of people like her who come to his shows not for entertainment, but for healing. Without thinking, without planning, Elvis stops singing mid-verse. The band, confused, gradually stops playing. 80,000 people fall silent. Elvis walks to the edge of the stage and kneels down, not the theatrical kneel he's done 1,000 times before, but something different, vulnerable, real. For 30 seconds, he stays there, and the silence becomes electric, not uncomfortable, but profound, like the entire room is holding its breath for something sacred. When Elvis finally stands, his voice is different, quieter, more honest than it's been in years. "Ladies and gentlemen," he says, "I want to tell you about a promise I made to my daddy." What follows isn't a performance, it's a confession. Elvis tells the crowd about Vernon's dying wish, about the letters from fans, about music as a lifeline. He doesn't ask permission from the colonel or the casino owners. He just speaks his truth to 80,000 strangers who suddenly don't feel like strangers anymore. "I'm going to sing you a song now," Elvis says, "not because it's on the set list, not because it's what you paid to hear, but because sometimes music is the only thing that makes sense when nothing else does." The first notes of "He Touched Me" come from Elvis's lips a cappella. No band, no backup singers, no orchestration. Just his voice, carrying across that massive room like a prayer. By the second verse, something miraculous happens. The audience starts singing along. Thousands of voices joining Elvis's, creating a gospel choir unlike anything Vegas has ever heard. The colonel watches from the wings, his face a mask of rage and terror. This is exactly what he feared. Elvis going off script, risking everything for a moment of authenticity that might destroy the carefully constructed image they've built. But as the song continues, something unexpected happens. The tears in the audience aren't tears of sadness, they're tears of recognition. These people, many of whom came to Vegas for escapism and entertainment, are being reminded of something deeper, something they didn't know they'd lost. The band, after 30 seconds of shocked silence, begins to join in quietly. First the piano, then the bass, then the drums. Not because they're following a chart, but because they're following their hearts. Even the Jordanaires, who were supposed to be fired if they performed gospel music, step forward from the wings. Gordon Stoker catches Elvis's eye and nods. They've made their choice. Their careers matter, but this moment matters more. When the song ends, the silence lasts almost a full minute. Then the applause begins, not the screaming hysteria typical of Elvis concerts, but something deeper, respectful, grateful. Elvis looks out at the crowd, sees the woman in the front row clutching her son's photograph, and realizes she's smiling through her tears. The promise has been kept, but it's changed him in ways he never expected. But the real consequences of that 30-second gesture won't become clear until the next morning, when Elvis wakes up to discover that his moment of authenticity has created a crisis no one saw coming. The phone in Elvis's suite starts ringing at 6 a.m. It's Colonel Parker, and he's furious. "Congratulations, Elvis. You've just cost us everything. The casino is threatening to cancel the rest of the residency. The recording label is talking about dropping you, and every major venue in the country is reconsidering whether you're a safe bet." Elvis feels the room spinning. "What are you talking about, Colonel? The crowd loved it." "The crowd isn't who signs the checks, son. You went religious on them. In Vegas, you turned a rock and roll show into a church service. That's not what people come to Sin City for." But even as Parker delivers this devastating news, Elvis's phone is ringing with other calls. Journalists wanting to interview him about the unprecedented moment of spiritual connection. Venue owners from across the country wanting to book him for shows that promise the same authenticity. Record producers begging him to record a gospel album. The gesture that the Colonel thinks will end Elvis's career might actually be the beginning of a completely different kind of success. 3 days later, a letter appears in the Las Vegas Sun that changes everything. It's from the woman in the front row, the one Elvis noticed during his moment of kneeling. "Dear editor, I went to see Elvis Presley because my grandson bought me tickets for my 75th birthday. I expected songs and dancing, maybe some nostalgia for better times. Instead, I found something I lost when my son died in Vietnam: hope." When Elvis knelt on that stage and then sang that gospel song, he wasn't performing. He was praying, with all of us, for all of us. In a city built on pretense and illusion, someone finally showed us something real. My son loved Elvis's music. He died listening to Love Me Tender on a radio in a jungle hospital. For 8 years, I couldn't hear Elvis's voice without crying. Thursday night, I cried again, but for the first time, they were tears of healing instead of loss. The letter is reprinted in newspapers across the country. Within a week, Elvis is receiving thousands of similar stories from people who were in that audience or who heard about what happened. But the most important letter Elvis receives comes from someone who wasn't there that night. Someone who's been watching from a distance, waiting for the right moment to reveal a secret that will change how Elvis sees his entire life and his father's death. September 15th, 1969, 3 weeks after the Las Vegas show that changed everything. Elvis sits in his Graceland study, reading yet another letter from a fan whose life was touched by that moment of authenticity. But this letter is different from the others. It's from Dr. Charles Manning, Vernon Presley's cardiologist during his final months. The letter is brief but earth-shattering. "Mr. Presley, I've been following the news coverage of your Las Vegas performance with great interest. Your father would have been proud, but not surprised. He spent his final weeks planning something he hoped would help you find your way back to the music that first saved your own soul. I think it's time you knew the truth about your father's condition. He could have lived longer, significantly longer, with the treatments we recommended, but he chose to stop them. He told me he'd accomplished what he needed to accomplish, and it was time to let go so his son could find his own strength. Your father didn't die of heart failure, Mr. Presley. He died of completion. He'd arranged everything he felt you needed to keep that promise, and he trusted you to do the rest." The words hit Elvis like a physical blow. Vernon hadn't just died of natural causes. He'd chosen his moment, believing his death would set his son free to find authenticity without worrying about disappointing a living father. The letter continues, "There's one more thing he wanted you to know, but only after you'd kept your word. Check the music room at Graceland, behind the piano. He left something there for you." Elvis's hands shake as he walks to the music room, the same room where he and Vernon used to sit together, playing guitar and singing gospel songs before fame complicated everything. Behind the piano, exactly where Dr. Manning said it would be, is a loose floorboard. Underneath, wrapped in cloth, is a cassette tape and another letter. This recording is different from the one in the safety deposit box. Vernon's voice is stronger, more at peace. It was made earlier, maybe months before his death. "Elvis, if you're hearing this, it means you kept your promise. And it means you discovered something I always knew but could never figure out how to tell you. Authenticity isn't something you perform, it's something you live." Vernon's voice grows warmer, more intimate. "I realized something in these final months. My job as your father wasn't to keep you safe from the world. It was to make sure the world got to meet the real you before it was too late. That promise I asked you to make, it was never about gospel music. It was about courage." What Vernon reveals next changes everything Elvis thought he understood about his father's death. "I could have fought the heart condition longer, Elvis. The doctors wanted me to try more treatments, experimental procedures, but I realized that as long as I was alive, you'd keep trying to protect me from your choices. You'd keep living for everyone else's approval instead of your own truth." Vernon's voice grows firmer, more resolved. "So I made a choice. I chose to trust you. I chose to believe that losing me would force you to find yourself, that keeping a promise to a dead father would be easier than disappointing a living one." The revelation devastates Elvis. Vernon hadn't just died, he'd sacrificed himself, believing his death would give his son the freedom to choose authenticity over safety. "Don't you dare feel guilty about this, son. This was my gift to you, the chance to discover who you are when you're not worried about letting anyone down." The tape continues with Vernon sharing memories of Elvis as a child, but then delivers one final message that will haunt Elvis for the rest of his life. "There's going to come a time, probably sooner than you want, when you'll have to choose again, between safety and authenticity, between what people expect and what your heart knows is right. When that time comes, remember this: I died believing in your courage. Don't make me wrong." Elvis realizes that Vernon's death wasn't just about enabling one moment of authenticity in Las Vegas. It was about preparing him for a lifetime of choosing truth over comfort. 54 years later, that 30 seconds in Las Vegas has become legendary, not because of what Elvis sang, but because of what he risked. Music historians call it the moment Elvis Presley stopped being a product and became an artist again. But the real legacy isn't in the history books. It's in the thousands of performers who have cited that moment as inspiration to choose authenticity over marketability. Musicians who have walked away from record deals that required them to compromise their artistic vision. Artists who have used their platforms to address difficult truths instead of easy entertainment. Recently discovered archives from the International Hotel reveal that Elvis's religious moment didn't hurt ticket sales. It created a waiting list that lasted for years. People weren't just buying tickets to see Elvis Presley perform. They were buying tickets to witness authenticity in an industry built on illusion. In 2019, exactly 50 years after that Las Vegas show, Priscilla Presley revealed in a rare interview that Elvis continued keeping Vernon's promise until his death. Every major performance included at least one moment where he abandoned the setlist and sang directly from his heart. He called them his Vernon moments, she said, times when he'd stop being Elvis Presley, the entertainer, and just be Elvis, the man his father raised him to be. But Priscilla also revealed something else. Elvis recorded hundreds of hours of gospel music in private, never intended for release. Songs he sang alone in Graceland's music room, keeping the promise to his father even when no audience was there to witness it. Those recordings still exist, locked away in the Graceland archives. A treasure trove of authenticity from a man who spent his life navigating the tension between public expectation and private truth. The question that haunts music historians is simple. What would happen if those recordings were released today? In a world even more obsessed with image and marketability than Elvis's era, would audiences still respond to raw, unfiltered authenticity the way that Vega's crowd did in 1969? Vernon Presley bet his life that they would. His son proved him right for 30 seconds that changed everything. That promise Vernon asked Elvis to make, to choose authenticity over approval, it's the same choice we face every day. In a world that rewards performance over truth, Elvis's 30 seconds of vulnerability reminds us that the moments we fear most might be the ones that matter most. What promise are you avoiding because it feels too risky?